my studio. So today we are going to go on a colouring adventure. We're going to take this one image, the orangerie, and colour it using 6 different mediums. It's going to be full of experimentation and a lot of fun. So let's just get started. So in this video we will be trying 6 different mediums. We will be trying out alcohol markers, a firm favourite, pencils, crayons, which is something very new for me, pastels, Biros and watercolour, which tends to be my nemesis. So we will see how we get on. So we're going to try all of these 6 mediums. This video is time stamped, so if you want to jump ahead to one of those particular mediums, you can just do that now. We are starting off with alcohol markers today. So for that we need to make sure that we use the correct ink. I have chosen Memento. So we need to make sure that we have a dye-based ink, because if we had a solvent-based ink it would bleed as we started to colour. So basically the carrier in an alcohol marker is alcohol. So if we were to blend that with an alcohol ink, we would see the ink run and smudge, and we want to avoid that if we want pretty colouring. So today I'm using a Memento ink to stamp out this gorgeous stamp ready to colour with our alcohol markers. The first thing you want to do with any form of colouring is to swatch out. So although I'm using alcohol markers and they are my medium of choice, I'm most familiar with them, hence why I'm starting with them, I'm still swatching out. So today I am using a combination of Ohuhu and Copic, mostly because quite a few of my oranges are dry when it comes to my Copic markers, so you can mix your brands together. So I'm just finding a gradient that works, and once I'm happy with the swatching, then we will move on to colouring the image. So today the image of choice is this one, the orangerie, and there's a few reasons for that. It's a nice simple image. And we are going to be working with multiple mediums that we are not used to, so it is very good. It's also not too detailed for when we move on to things like crayons and pastels, but also because it's fairly monochromatic, and that is really good because it allows us to really think about values and do a value study. Now, when working with new mediums that we are not used to, this is a really valuable idea. Because it means that you can learn how to create depth of colour with technique as opposed to with actual pigmented colour. So it's a really good way of getting to know the product, is to work in a monochromatic colour scheme, because it allows you to build up the technique. Once you have the technique, then you can get experimental with colours. So if there's any particular medium that we cover today, do just let me know if you would like to see us play with it a little bit more, and we can get a little bit more experimentational with colours. Today we are just looking at technique. So as always when colouring, we want to think about our shadow areas, our mid-tones and our highlights. So that's why you will have seen me immediately put down the darkest colour, and now you can see me colouring with my mid colour, and I will also have the light tone. So you always want to get your shadows nice and dark and then your highlights nice and bright, and that will really bring your colouring to life. Now I personally like to work dark to light when it comes to using my alcohol markers. Many artists work the other way round, so you have to find what is comfortable for you. Now I do work dark to light, but what can happen is as you layer the lighter colours on, because it has that alcohol carrier, it will push the pigment of the darker colours away and desaturate them slightly. So normally I will end up going with a second level of colouring just to combat that. Another top tip when it comes to using your alcohol markers is to use it at a side angle. It is a brush nib and it hasn't been designed to be used on point. Now as colourists, we quite often maybe use the point of our pen, maybe for flicks of the hair or really detailed work like I will do in the round of this orange, but that can lead to sticky markers because it's not the way your markers have been designed. But if that does happen, we can clean that with isopropyl alcohol. I do have another video on that if you wish to check that out, but as I said, using the side of the brush nib is the best way to layer down your colour. So with this particular image, we are getting to the end where we're putting the final few details down. Alcohol markers can be one of the more quick mediums to use, as we will see as we go through this process. As always, I like to add a few extra details with a white pen just to finish it off. That's my quirk. I like it and I just think it brings it to life, and we will be doing that same trick with all the mediums that we use today. And with that, the alcohol markers one is done. So let's move on to our next one, which will be pencils. It's time to stamp up our image again, but this time we are using VersaFine Clear, which is a pigment ink. So this ink works really well with all the mediums that we have planned for the rest of this video. As well as choosing this as an ink, I'm also working with mixed media paper. Again, this is designed to take multiple different mediums so we know it will work with what we have planned. And that is really important to make sure that you're using the right ink pad and the right paper in order to get the best results. First, I'm selecting which pencils I am going to use, again concentrating on the fact that I need colours to cover my shadow, my mid-tone and my highlight. I do find when colouring with oranges or yellows that having a brown for your shadow tone works really well. I never find I get quite enough depth with just the orange itself. So we need to do this, swatch out to make sure that we're happy, and then make sure that all of our pencils are nice and sharp, ready for the colouring process. When colouring with pencils, pressure is really important. So your paper has a tooth. You can imagine that as almost like little divots in the paper. And when colouring, we are gradually filling up those little divots with colour, and that is the colour that we end up seeing on the page. Now, if we go in when we immediately start colouring and fill all of those divots or the tooth right up to the top, there is no room for manoeuvre, to blend, or to create interesting looks with colour. So it's really important to very slowly build up our colouring. So we start off with a really light pressure and just put a little bit amount of colour in those divots or the tooth of the paper. And then we add a little bit more with maybe a different colour and a little bit more, and we get a much more interesting, unique blend, and that's where pencils really become magical. To give an example of the difference it makes, in this particular swatch, on the top swatch, what I have done is gone in with full pressure from the beginning, and in the second swatch I've gradually built up my colours, and you can see the difference that it makes. You can see this difference in pressure by the way that I hold my pencil. So when we are using a light pressure, I am holding the pencil really far back, almost at the end sometimes, and that gives me a really light pressure and coverage. Then as I'm building up that colour and I'm more confident with the colours that have been laid down and I feel the blend is going well, I would use a mid pressure, and at that point I'm holding the pencil about halfway down the pencil. Then as we get to the final stage where we are burnishing and deliberately filling up the tooth of that paper so that there are no white flecks, you can see me holding the pencil really close to the pencil point, and that's how you can gauge the type of pressure that is being used as you're colouring. As you're getting to your final stages of colouring and you are at that burnish stage, what you want to do is make sure that you are using that hard pressure, but then as you come out of that colour and go into the next colour that you're transitioning into, that you make sure you go from that hard pressure to a mid pressure, so there's still a tiny bit of tooth for you to then bring the next colour on and move through, and keep doing the same until you have the tooth completely filled. As with the last colouring, we get to the finishing touches, which includes a little bit of white gel pen magic. I do find that of all the mediums, gel pen seems to struggle over pencils the most. So we did get there, and it has added a little bit of extra detail, even if it's not as prominent as it is with the other mediums that we have used. So that is this one all done and ready to move on to something a little bit different, because next we're going to be using crayons. So colouring with crayons isn't something I've done a huge amount of, so I did do a practice in one of my journals. Now there's two approaches that you can take. One is to very slowly layer up the colours, much as we did with the pencil, filling up that tooth gradually. As we've kind of done that already with the pencils, I thought we'd go for this option in the video. And this one, we are laying down the colour much more intensely and thickly, but then using a heat gun to get a blend. So this is a really fun technique. So let's just have a try. As with all the colouring that we have done today, I did start doing a swatch. A couple of reasons: make sure you're happy with your colour, make sure you're happy with your blend, and it just gives you a feel for the medium. Now, as I said, with this particular technique, we are trying to fill up that tooth, but I did learn that it is best to still kind of go for a medium pressure and then to burnish. I found that when I just went straight in with the burnish, you can see on my sample test that I did in my sketchbook that the blend isn't as good. It is quite harsh. Whereas I find if I went in with a medium pressure and then burnished on top of that, I got a much nicer blend. So that's the technique that I went with. A couple of other things that I learned along the way. Yes, we can blend with the heat gun, but also if you're not completely happy with that, that whilst the paper is warm from when you've just used your heat gun, if you go over it with the crayon again, the crayon actually melts into the paper. So you can get some really, really fun effects. I have to say, I love doing this. I had a complete blast. It was like going back to my childhood, but coming out with really, really professional results, which was brilliant. I think this would be a really fun medium to explore further. So if you would like to see more crayon colouring, please do let me know in the comments below. Another thing that I think would be really interesting, and I tested it slightly in my sketchbook, is mixing the crayons with watercolours, because obviously the wax will create a resist on your colouring page. So if we mix that with watercolours, we could come up with some really fun effects. But for a basic starting point and learning the technique, this was a really fun image to colour. You can see that I am using a paper stub here to blend. This just works really well. I'm used to using it for pencils and it cleans up easy. You just give it a little sand. Another top tip I would give is while you're working, any stray bits of wax, you want to brush those away, because if you heat those little speckles, they're there to stay. They're not going anywhere. So it is good to kind of remove them before using the heat gun. And yeah, that's us just adding our finishing touches now, and we've created a crayon masterpiece. Who knew? The next medium that we are going to play with is pastels. Now, as you can see, I have quite a collection there, and I have collected lots, and it's honestly a medium that I never ever pull out to even sort of play with or experiment with. So today that is going to change. So I did enjoy playing with pastels. In the end, I opted for some craft artist ones and some pan pastels. What I have appreciated is that I don't have the tools for this. I have the makeup sponge and one small applicator. So I think to give this a realistic tutorial vibe, or to give a realistic review of colouring with pastels, I need better tools with which to apply the pastels. However, we still managed to get something coloured and it looked okay. I would have liked more detail. In my head, what I had planned to do was to bring out the detail with some pastel pencils that I own. But as we've been talking about through this whole video, what had occurred in putting down my base coat and layering up the pastels is that I'd obviously filled that tooth. So when I tried to go in with my pastel pencils, literally nothing happened. So I will try colouring again with those pencils, but it will have to be just those pencils. We could maybe do like a pencils versus pan version of pastels in the future. So if you would like to see that, let me know in the comments below. But yeah, this was quick and easy and gorgeous results. So moving on to watercolours, and today we are playing with the Kuretake Ganzi Tambi. Now, many of you may know that I am trying to conquer watercolours this year. It's a medium I love, and I seem to be very loose when it comes to watercolours, and I struggle to get the control and detail that I do with other mediums. So watercolours tends to be, I use it a lot for shadowing, I use it a lot for creating backgrounds, but I'm not very good at using it for actually colouring up images. So that is the task for today. So I have watched many artists do this, but most artists do what they call an underpainting, where they cover the whole painting with one colour and they let that dry. As a colourist, I've never really done that before. I'm not sure why. So that was step one for this particular painting. This has probably been one of my most successful colourings with watercolour, and there are a number of reasons for that, which I will share with you. Firstly, patience. Because I was creating this particular video and I was colouring this same image multiple times, what I did was I got the watercolours out first, I did the underpainting, and then I moved on to the alcohol markers. Then I came back, got the next layer of colour down, and then went on to pencils. Then I came back and did the next bit, and so on and so on. So it meant that I really did allow it time to dry in between the layers and slowly build up the colour rather than trying to rush it, which quite often led me to flooding the page. That is the second thing, is that I also didn't go with too much water. I tend to use a lot of water when I'm watercolouring, and that's great for creating things like galaxy backgrounds and things like that, but not ideal for creating a detailed painting. So I really pulled that back. There wasn't a huge amount of water on my brush, and then I used a damp brush to blend between the layers, and that worked far more successfully, and I'm far happier with the results. I did struggle. One of the main reasons for my struggles is that I'm not very good at looking after my brushes. So with your brushes, you should clean them straight away, and when you dry them flat. I do clean them thoroughly and I do dry them flat, but I can't say how long they sit in my pot of water before they get cleaned. As a result, most of my brushes, when it came to trying to do detailed painting like this, were not very helpful. They're fine for the other sorts of crafting I do, but not for this. So I think I might have to get myself a set of dedicated watercolour brushes. So that is the other tip that I would give you. Please, please look after your equipment. It will make your life so much easier. As I was playing with watercolour, I did still have to go for the finishing off splashes. I just think that looks really creative and effective, and so I couldn't not do it, even though I was going for a more detailed painting style. But that's our watercolour painting all done. So we reach our last medium for today's video, and we are looking at Biro pens. Now these are a fun medium to use. They are more difficult to blend because you are having to blend through doing cross hatching basically. So again, the fact that we have chosen a monochromatic picture is a great way of getting used to this medium first. So we are going to be concentrating on creating values light to dark purely through just cross hatching. Now I did experiment with two different types of colouring with biros when I prepared this video. There's an amazing artist called Tony Jagus over on Instagram, and he does lots of artwork through just scribbling the pen. And again, the way you get that to look like art is to concentrate on where your shadows go and where your lighter tones are. But for this particular video, we are going to stick with using basic cross hatching in order to create the effect. If you would like to see this more, then do let me know in the comments below. As I said, this one we're looking at technique. Maybe in a future video we can look at blending colours and possibly the scribble technique as well, but let me know what you think. So after doing my practice sessions, I realised that it was better for me to work in smaller sections. I think the very first time I did it, I tried to sort of colour the whole orange really lightly first, and that wasn't overly successful. So you can see in this one, I'm just working in little patches. Again, I'm getting into the shadow area first and doing little cross hatches in those areas, and then gradually building across the whole thing. I've learned that this requires patience. It goes through quite a few ugly stages, so there's quite a few points in it where you sit there and think, oh no, what have I done? I've just ruined it. But again, it's trusting the process and just continuing with that cross hatching, and also thickness of line. So in here you can see me, I'm really putting a nice thick line in the shadow areas, and line depth or width makes such a difference in these line art colourings. We used to do ink at school. We used to have to go out and do paintings with just like an ink pen, and again, thickness of line was something that was really taught. So get in nice with a nice big thick line in your shadow areas, and then build out little cross hatches from there. It was so much fun watching this one come together, and I do feel, as regards to all the mediums that we have used, I have been on the biggest learning curve with this one. I've attempted biros a couple of times before, but not as successfully as this. So I do think it's worth persevering, and yet it's also something you could take anywhere. You can have a notepad in your bag with some biros, and it means you can pick it up and sketch and colour at any time if you build up the confidence with this particular medium. This is me putting the final details on a white gel pen, as always, as the same with all the other mediums, and it looks absolutely fabulous when it is done. So now we can see all of these together with their corresponding mediums next to the pictures. They all look like oranges, they all look fabulous, but they definitely all have their unique look. So I wanted to document this experiment and also be able to refer back to it so that I could check out what I had learned. So I did decide to add it to a journal. I still put doodly borders and stitching detail in because it's me and it makes it look pretty. But more importantly, I documented it and took notes of the mediums and brands that I used so that I can check it for future reference. So I hope you've enjoyed this little colouring journey with me. Is there any of these mediums that you're going to give a try to? I would love to know. If you enjoy colouring, you might want to check out this video here, and I will see you again very, very soon.